You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And today, at the start of April, we can celebrate Poetry Month. We're going to do so by highlighting the background of a particular poet, a Victorian lady, actually, who became quite famous. No, not Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but who, in her own way and time, was quite scandalous. We're going to read her most famous poem, very controversial in its day, but very popular. It's a story poem and quite, lascivious. Not the sort of product you would think that a Victorian lady might produce. But the poet was Christina Rossetti, and the poem is Goblin Market, and there's a lot to be said about it and about her. So let's get started by going inside the headlines. I'm grateful to the Poetry Foundation for these biographical notes on Christina Rossetti, which I've excerpted and adapted here. She was born in 1830, the youngest child in a remarkably gifted family. Her father, the Italian poet Gabriele Rossetti, immigrated to England in 1824 and established a career as a Dante scholar, and married the half-English, half-Italian Frances Polidari in 1826, and with her had 4 children: Maria Francesca, Gabriele Charles Dante, later famous as the painter and poet Dante Gabriele Rossetti, but always called Gabriele by family members, William Michael, and Christina Georgina. The children received their earliest education, and the girls all of their education, from their mother, who had been trained as a governess and was committed to cultivating intellectual excellence in her family, although she tended to teach heavily forms that were devotional and religious. But her ambition, nevertheless, was fulfilled. Maria became the author of a respected study on Dante, as well as books on religious instruction. Dante Gabriel distinguished himself as one of the foremost poets and painters of his era, and William was a prolific art and literary critic and editor as well as a memoirist of the Pre-Raphaelite movement. An aside here, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, later known as the Pre-Raphaelites, was a group of English painters, poets, and art critics founded in 1848 by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, among others. The Brotherhood, and a brotherhood it was, sought a return to the scrupulous detail, the colors, the complex compositions of Quattrocento Italian art, and rejected what they regarded as the mechanistic approach first adopted by Mannerist artists who succeeded Raphael and Michelangelo. The Brotherhood believed that the classical poses and elegant compositions of Raphael, in particular, had been a corrupting influence on the academic teaching of art, hence the name Pre-Raphaelite. The group associated their work with John Ruskin, the English critic whose influences were driven by his religious background. Christian themes were abundant. Let's keep this in mind. But to cease digressing, meanwhile, back in the day, Christina became one of the Victorian age's finest poets, often cited as being in competition with Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Critical interest in her poetry swelled in the final decades of the 20th century, largely impelled by the emergence of feminist criticism that reevaluated her work, since much of it focuses on gender issues in her poetry. Her childhood was reportedly quite happy, and in temperament she was most like her brother Dante Gabriel, the pair being nicknamed two storms of the family. Christina was given to tantrums and fractious behavior, and had to fight hard to subdue her passionate temper, so it was said. Perhaps her self-control was achieved at too great a cost. Her brother William commented that, quote, In innate character, she was vivacious, and one might readily have supposed she would develop into a woman of expansive heart, fond of society and diversions. What came to pass was, of course, quite the contrary." Close quote. As an adult, Christina was considered to be over-scrupulous and excessively restrained. Caught up in the Oxford movement when it reached London in the 1840s, the Rossettis shifted from an evangelical to an Anglo-Catholic orientation, and this outlook influenced virtually all of Christina's poetry. In fact, the importance of her religion in her life and art can just not be overstated. More than half her poetic output is devotional, and the works of her later years in both poetry and prose are almost exclusively so. Almost. Recurring themes include the inconstancy of human love, the vanity of earthly pleasures, renunciation, individual unworthiness, etc. Her father's health collapsed in 1843, leaving Gabriele Rossetti virtually blind and unable to teach. His wife returned to her former employment as a daily governess, and Maria and William also took employment, while Dante Gabriel continued his art studies, and Christina remained at home as a companion to their ailing father. In 1845, she too suffered a collapse in health. The breakdown has mystified biographers, some of whom have surmised that the physical symptoms were a psychosomatic attempt to rescue Christina from having to make financial contributions to the family by working as a governess like her mother and sister. She was diagnosed as having a heart condition, but another doctor speculated that she was mentally ill, suffering from a kind of religious mania. Her recurring bouts of depression, her lifelong sense of sin, her nightmarish poems about a crocodile devouring his kin, remember that one, and the recurring motif of an unnameable secret are all indications of possible suppressed sexual trauma. William insists in his memoir that one cannot understand his sister unless one recognizes that she was, quote, an almost constant and often sadly smitten invalid, close quote. By her 16th birthday, Christina had written more than 50 poems that were transcribed into a notebook by her sister, and in 1847 the collection was privately printed by her grandfather. It was circulated and well received. But she was to reach her peak with Goblin Market, published in 1862. It was brimming with sexuality, and its sensuality in describing fruits as the temptations of self-indulgence and pleasure, as opposed to themes of mortality and corruptibility, was stunning. Although Christina was never a member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, she was a de facto token woman, in that her poetry had been described as such Pre-Raphaelite because of its rich, precise detail, its use of symbol, its deliberate medievalism. Also, she posed as the Virgin Mary for her brother Dante Gabriel's paintings. One of the Pre-Raphaelite brethren, James Collinson, proposed marriage to her in 1848, but she refused the offer, given his recent conversion to Catholicism as the reason. In 1850, Christina wrote Maud, A Story for Girls, which was published in 1897 after her death. The title's character's appearance and personality bear notable similarities to descriptions of the author, and this work, with its exploration of the tensions among the sometimes incompatible categories of Victorian England, being female, being a poet, and being an Anglo-Catholic. So it's usually considered a semi-autobiographical portrait of the adolescent Christina. 15-year-old Maud Foster, the character in the book, is a poet whose verse dwells on themes of suffering, world-weariness, resignation, and religious devotion. Furthermore, the conflict in the narrative revolves around Maud's experience of the incompatibility of ladylike behavior and poetic achievement. Like the author, Maud is torn between pride in her work and moral qualms about that pride. The heroine's overactive conscience and endless self-recriminations provide lots of insight into Christina's overscrupulous nature. She has often been depicted, Christina that is, as shrinking from worldly concerns, but she engaged in quite a few forms of activism. In 1854, during the Crimean War, she volunteered to join Florence Nightingale's nurses, but she was turned down because of ill health. In early 1859, she began volunteering at the St. Mary Magdalene Penitentiary in Highgate, a charitable institution for the so-called reclamation of so-called fallen women. By the summer of 1859, she was devoting a good deal of time to her work at Highgate, and its influence can be seen in her poems about illicit love, betrayal, and illegitimacy, though poems composed before the period of her work at Highgate also demonstrate her prior interest in the, quote, fallen, unquote, woman. Her interest in this topic reflects the Victorian concern about prostitution as a social evil, not a political one. In other poems, Rossetti also presented a rather bleak view of gender relations, and the theme of inconstancy and insufficiency of any love except that of God pervades her devotional poetry. During the early 1860s, she was often in contact with female artists, including members of the Portfolio Society, an informal group organized by Barbara Beauduchon, and female poets such as Jean Ingelow and Dora Greenwell. She published poems in the feminist periodicals The English Woman's Journal and Victoria magazine. In 1866, she declined another offer of marriage, this time from Charles Bagot Cayley, who had studied Italian with her father since 1847. From 1870 to 1872, she was dangerously ill, with a condition characterized by fever, exhaustion, heart palpitations, feeling stifled, occasional loss of consciousness, violent headaches, palsied hands, and swelling in the neck that made swallowing difficult. Her hair fell out, her skin became discolored, her eyes began to protrude, and her voice changed. Finally, she was diagnosed with a rare thyroid condition more commonly known as Graves' disease. And although she recovered, the threat of a relapse always remained. She then published the first of her 6 volumes of devotional prose. Her devotional works, while they urge obedience to divine will, both submit and subvert. That is, they encroach into the male territories of theological study and spiritual guidance, while urging obedience to divine will. Similarly, her views on gender issues combine the conservative and the radical. Citing biblical teaching on women's subordination to men, Rossetti had written to the poet Augusta Webster in 1878 that because she believed that, quote, the highest functions are not in this world open to both sexes, close quote, she nevertheless could not sign a petition for women's suffrage. She went on, however, to suggest that suffrage is not enough to protect women's interests, and that female representation in Parliament would be more consistent with the aims of the women's movement. This, by the way, was also a statement by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She also argued for the heroic possibilities of maternal love and its potential to, quote, sweep away the barrier of sex, close quote. It's not at all uncommon to find such traces of subversion in her apparently conservative statements on gender roles. Clearly, biographers have painted far too simplistic a portrait of the middle-aged Christina Rossetti as being narrowly conservative and reclusive and overly pious. She was politically outspoken in those years. She was critical of slavery, imperialism, and military aggression. She was passionately committed to the anti-vivisection movement that was combating animal experimentation. She petitioned for legislation to protect children from being prostituted and sexually exploited by raising the age of consent. That's hardly passivity. In 1892, Christina Rossetti was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent a mastectomy that was performed in her own home. The cancer recurred the following year, and after months of acute suffering, she died on the 29th of December, 1894. Today, Goblin Market remains her most discussed poem. Critics tend to dismiss her protest that she intended no allegorical meaning and have interpreted in various ways her fairy tale of two sisters' responses to the temptation of goblin fruit. In fact, the multivalency of this poem is its most striking quality. It can be read as a straightforward moral allegory, but it's also been interpreted as a specifically Christian allegory with its reenactment of the temptation in the Garden of Eden. Marxist critics, amusingly, have pointed to the poem's separation of the domestic and commercial spheres and to Lizzie and Laura's attempts to do business in a marketplace designed to make women into goods to be exchanged rather than agents in their own right. Well, it does seem hilarious to ignore the more recent and powerful feminist interpretations that have surfaced and now do seem fairly obvious. The sexuality of the poem, its orality, and its lesbian dynamics, as well as its plain woman love and sisterhood, do seem prominent. Furthermore, the climactic redemption of one woman, one sister, by the other, can be seen as a critique of Victorian cultural attitudes toward the fallen woman, for here she is not forever lost, but she's saved by her sister's intervention. The danger that men pose as sexual predators finally is offset by female solidarity. Take that, Victorian sensibility. It's time for our break, but we'll return in just a moment with an uninterrupted, one-time reading of Christina Rossetti's great poem, Goblin Market. And we won't break it, and we'll read it straight through as a story poem from beginning to end. That's coming right up. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. Morning and evening, maids heard the goblins cry, "Come, buy our orchard fruits, come buy, apples and quinces, lemons and oranges, plump unpecked cherries, melons and raspberries, bloom-down-cheeked peaches, swart-headed mulberries, wild, free-born cranberries, crab-apples, dewberries, pineapples, blackberries, apricots, strawberries, all ripe together in summer weather, morns that pass by, fair eves that fly, come buy, our grapes fresh from the vine, pomegranates full and fine, dates and sharp bullaces, rare pears and greengages, damsons and bilberries, taste them and try, currants and gooseberries, bright fire-like barberries, figs to fill your mouth, citrons from the south, sweet to tongue and sound to eye. Come buy, come buy. Evening by evening, among the brookside rushes, Laura bowed her head to hear. Lizzie veiled her blushes. Crouching close together in the cooling weather, with clasping arms and cautioning lips, with tingling cheeks and fingertips. Lie close, Laura said, pricking up her golden head. We must not look at goblin men. We must not buy their fruits. Who knows upon what soil they fed their hungry, thirsty roots? Come by, called the goblins, hobbling down the glen. Oh, cried Lizzie, Laura, Laura, you should not peep at goblin men. Lizzie covered up her eyes, covered close lest they should look. Laura reared her glossy head and whispered like the restless brook, Look, Lizzie, look, Lizzie, down the glen tramp little men. One hauls a basket, one bears a plate, one lugs a golden dish of many pounds weight. How fair the vine must grow, whose grapes are so luscious! How warm the wind must blow through those fruit bushes! No, said Lizzie, no, 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 their offers should not charm us, their evil gifts would harm us. She thrust a dimpled finger in each ear, shut eyes and ran. Curious Laura chose to linger, wondering at each merchant man. One had a cat's face, one whisked a tail, one tramped at a rat's pace, one crawled like a snail. One like a wombat prowled obtuse and furry, one like a ratel tumbled hurry-scurry. She heard a voice like the voice of doves, cooing all together. They sounded kind and full of loves in the pleasant weather. Laura stretched her gleaming neck like a rush-embedded swan, like a lily from the beck, like a moonlit poplar branch, like a vessel at the launch, when its last restraint is gone. Backwards up the mossy glen turned and trooped the goblin men, with their shrill repeated cry, Come buy, come buy. When they reached where Laura was, they stood stock still upon the moss, leering at each other, brother with queer brother, signalling each other, brother with sly brother. One set his basket down, one reared his plate. One began to weave a crown of tendrils, leaves, and rough nuts brown. Men sell not such in any town. One heaved the golden weight of dish and fruit to offer her. Come buy, was still their cry. Laura stared, but did not stir, longed, but had no money. The whisk-tailed merchant bade her taste in tones as smooth as honey. The cat-faced purred, the rat-faced spoke a word of welcome, and the snail-paced even was heard. One parrot-voiced and jolly cried, Pretty goblin, still for pretty Polly. One whistled like a bird. But sweet-toothed Laura spoke in haste, Good folk, I have no coin. To take were to purloin. I have no copper in my purse, I have no silver either, and all my gold is on the furze that shakes in windy weather above the rusty heather. You have much gold upon your head, they answered all together. Buy from us with the golden curl. She clipped a precious golden lock. She dropped a tear more rare than pearl, then sucked their fruit globes fair or red, sweeter than honey from the rock, stronger than man-rejoicing wine, clearer than water flowed that juice. She never tasted such before. How should it cloy with length of use? She sucked and sucked and sucked the more. Fruits which that unknown orchard bore, she sucked until her lips were sore, then flung the emptied rinds away, but gathered up one kernel stone, and knew not was it night or day as she turned home alone. Lizzie met her at the gate, full of wise upbraidings. "Dear, you should not stay so late. Twilight is not good for maidens. Should not loiter in the glen, in the haunts of goblin men. Do you not remember Jeanie, how she met them in the moonlight, took their gifts, both choice and many, ate their fruits and wore their flowers, plucked from bowers where summer ripens at all hours? But ever in the noonlight she pined and pined away, sought them by night and day, found them no more, but dwindled and grew gray, then fell with the first snow, while to this day no grass will grow where she lies low. I planted daisies there a year ago that never blow. You should not loiter so." "Nay, hush," said Laura. "Nay, hush, my sister. I ate and ate my fill, and yet my mouth waters still. Tomorrow night I will buy more," and kissed her. "Have done with sorrow. I'll bring you plums tomorrow, fresh on their mother twigs. Cherries worth getting. You cannot think what figs my teeth have met in. What melons, icy cold, piled on a dish of gold, too huge for me to hold. What peaches with a velvet nap, pellucid grapes without one seed. Odorous indeed must be the mead whereon they grow, and pure the wave they drink, with lilies at the brink, and sugar sweet their sap. Golden head by golden head, like two pigeons in one nest, folded in each other's wings, they lay down in their curtained bed. Like two blossoms on one stem, like two flakes of new-fallen snow, like two wands of ivory tipped with gold for awful kings. Moons and stars gazed in at them. Wind sang to them lullaby. Lumbering owls forbore to fly. Not a bat flapped to and fro round their rest. Cheek to cheek and breast to breast, locked together in one nest. Early in the morning, when the first cock crowed his warning, neat like bees, as sweet and busy, Laura rose with Lizzie, fetched in honey, milked the cows, aired and set to rights the house, kneaded cakes of whitest wheat, cakes for dainty mouths to eat, next churned butter, whipped up cream, fed their poultry, sat and sewed, talked as modest maidens should, Lizzie with an open heart, Laura in an absent dream, one content, one sick in part, one warbling for the mere bright day's daylight, one longing for the night. At length slow evening came. They went with pitchers to the reedy brook, Lizzie most placid in her look, Laura most like a leaping flame. They drew the gurgling water from its deep. Lizzie plucked purple and rich golden flags, then turning homeward said, "The sunset flushes those furthest, loftiest crags. Come, Laura, not another maiden lags. No wilful squirrel wags. Beasts and birds are fast asleep." But Laura loitered still among the rushes, and said the bank was steep, and said the hour was early still, the dew not fallen, the wind not chill, listening ever, but not catching the customary cry, "Come buy, come buy," with its iterated jingle of sugar-baited words, not for all her watching, once discerning even one goblin, racing, whisking, tumbling, hobbling, let alone the herds that used to tramp along the glen, in groups or single, of brisk fruit merchant men. Till Lizzie urged, "O Laura, come, I hear the fruit call, but I dare not look. You should not loiter longer at this brook. Come with me home. The stars rise, the moon bends her arc, each glowworm winks her spark. Let us get home before the night grows dark. for clouds may gather, though this is summer weather. Put out the lights and drench us through. Then if we lost our way, what should we do? Laura turned cold as stone to find her sister heard that cry alone, that goblin cry. Come buy our fruits, come buy. Must she then buy no more such dainty fruit? Must she no more such succous pasture find? Gone deaf and blind? Her tree of life drooped from the root. She said not one word in her heart's sore ache, but peering through the dimness, naught discerning, trudged home, her pitcher dripping all the way. So crept to bed and lay silent till Lizzie slept, then sat up in a passionate yearning, and gnashed her teeth for balked desire, and wept as if her heart would break. Day after day, night after night, Laura kept watch in vain, in sullen silence of exceeding pain. She never caught again the goblin cry, come buy, come buy. She never spied the goblin men hawking their fruits along the glen, but when the noon waxed bright, her hair grew thin and grey. She dwindled, as the fair full moon doth turn to swift decay, and burn her fire away. One day, remembering her kernel stone, she set it by a wall that faced the south, dewed it with tears, hoped for a root, watched for a waxing shoot. But there came none. It never saw the sun. It never felt the trickling moisture run, while with sunk eyes and faded mouth she dreamed of melons, as a traveler sees false waves in desert drought, with shade of leaf-crowned trees, and burns the thirstier in the sandful breeze. She no more swept the house, tended the fowls or cows, fetched honey, kneaded cakes of wheat, brought water from the brook, but sat down listless in the chimney nook and would not eat. Tender Lizzie could not bear to watch her sister's cankerous care, yet not to share. She night and morning caught the goblin's cry, come buy our orchard fruit, come buy, come buy. Beside the brook along the glen she heard the tramp of goblin men, the yoke and stir poor Laura could not hear, longed to buy fruit to comfort her, but feared to pay too dear. She thought of Jeannie in her grave, who should have been a bride, but who for joys brides hope to have, fell sick and died in her gay prime, in earliest winter time, with the first glazing rime, with the first snowfall of crisp winter time. Till Laura dwindling seemed knocking at death's door. Then Lizzie weighed no more, better or worse, but put a silver penny in her purse, kissed Laura, crossed the heath with clumps of furze at twilight, halted by the brook, and for the first time in her life began to listen and to look. Laughed every goblin when they spied her peeping, came towards her hobbling, flying, running, leaping, puffing and blowing, chuckling, clapping, crowing, clucking and gobbling, mopping and mowing, full of airs and graces, pulling wry faces, demure grimaces, cat-like and rat-like, rat-tail and wombat-like, snail-paced in a hurry, parrot-voiced and whistler, helter-skelter, hurry-scurry, chattering like magpies, fluttering like pigeons, gliding like fishes, hugged her and kissed her, squeezed and caressed her, stretched up their dishes, panniers and plates. Look at our apples, russet and dun. Bob at our cherries, bite at our peaches, citrons and dates, grapes for the asking, pears red with basking out in the sun, plums on their twigs, pluck them and suck them, pomegranates, figs. "Good folk," said Lizzie, mindful of Jeanie, "give me much and many," held out her apron, tossed them her penny. "Nay, take a seat with us, honour and eat with us," they answered, grinning. "Our feast is but beginning. Night yet is early, warm and dew pearly, wakeful and starry. Such fruits as these no man can carry. Half their bloom would fly, half their dew would dry, half their flavour would pass by. Sit down and feast with us. Be welcome guest with us. Cheer you and rest with us." "Thank you," said Lizzie, "but one waits at home alone for me. So without further parleying, if you will not sell me any of your fruits, though much and many, give me back my silver penny I tossed you for a fee." They began to scratch their pates, no longer wagging, purring, but visibly demurring, grunting and snarling. One called her proud, cross-grained, uncivil. Their tones waxed loud, their looks were evil. Lashing their tails, they trod and hustled her, elbowed and jostled her, clawed with their nails, barking, mewing, hissing, mocking, tore her gown and soiled her stocking, twitched her hair out by the roots, stamped upon her tender feet, held her hands and squeezed their fruits against her mouth to make her eat. White and golden Lizzie stood, like a lily in a flood, like a rock of blue-veined stone lashed by tides obstreperously, like a beacon left alone in a hoary, roaring sea, sending up a golden fire, like a fruit-crowned orange tree, white with blossoms, honey-sweet, sore beset by wasp and bee, like a royal virgin town, topped with gilded dome and spire, close beleaguered by a fleet, mad to tug her standard down. One may lead a horse to water 20, cannot make him drink. Though the goblins cuffed and caught her, coaxed and fought her, bullied and besought her, scratched her, pinched her black as ink, kicked her, knocked her, mauled and mocked her, Lizzie uttered not a word, would not open lip from lip, lest they should cram a mouthful in, but laughed in heart, to feel the drip of juice that syruped all her face, and lodged in dimples of her chin, and streaked her neck, which quaked like curd. At last the evil people, worn out by her resistance, flung back her penny, kicked their fruit along whichever road they took, not leaving root or stone or shoot. Some writhed into the ground, some dived into the brook without ring and ripple, some scudded on the gale without a sound, some vanished in the distance. In a smart ache, tingle, Lizzie went her way, knew not was it night or day, sprang up the bank, tore through the furze, threaded copse and dingle, and heard her penny jingle bouncing in her purse. Its bounce was music to her ear. She ran and ran, as if she feared some goblin man dogged her with jibe or curse or something worse, but not one goblin scurried after. Nor was she pricked by fear. The kind heart made her windy paced, that urged her home quite out of breath with haste and inward laughter. She cried, "Laura!" up the garden. "Did you miss me? Come and kiss me. Never mind my bruises. Hug me, kiss me, suck my juices, squeezed from goblin fruits for you, goblin pulp and goblin dew. Eat me, drink me, love me. Laura, make much of me. For your sake I have braved the glen and had to do with goblin merchant men." Laura started from her chair, flung her arms up in the air, clutched her hair. "Lizzie, Lizzie, have you tasted for my sake the fruit forbidden? Must your light like mine be hidden, your young life like mine be wasted, undone in mine undoing, and ruined in my ruin, thirsty, cankered, goblin-ridden? She clung about her sister, kissed and kissed and kissed her. Tears once again refreshed her shrunken eyes, dropping like rain after long sultry drought. Shaking with anguish, fear, and pain, she kissed and kissed her with a hungry mouth. Her lips began to scorch. That juice was wormwood to her tongue. She loathed the feast. Writhing as one possessed, she leaped and sung, rent all her robe and wrung her hands in lamentable haste, and beat her breast. Her locks streamed like the torch borne by a racer at full speed, or like the mane of horses in their flight, or like an eagle when she stems the light straight toward the sun, or like a caged thing freed, or like a flying flag when armies run. Swift fire spread through her veins, knocked at her heart, met the fire smoldering there, and overbore its lesser flame. She gorged on bitterness without a name. Ah, fool, to choose such part of soul-consuming care. Sense failed in the mortal strife, like the watchtower of a town which an earthquake shatters down, like a lightning-stricken mast, like a wind-uprooted tree, spun about like a foam-topped waterspout, cast down headlong in the sea. She fell at last. Pleasure past, and anguish past. Is it death, or is it life? Life out of death. That night long, Lizzie watched by her, counted her pulses' flagging stir, felt for her breath, held water to her lips, and cooled her face with tears and fanning leaves. But when the first birds chirped about their eaves, and early reapers plodded to the place of golden sheaves, and dew-wet grass bowed in the morning winds so brisk to pass, and new buds with new day opened of cup-like lilies on the stream, Laura awoke as from a dream, laughed in the innocent old way, hugged Lizzie, but not twice or thrice. Her gleaming locks showed not one thread of gray. Her breath was sweet as May, and light danced in her eyes. Days, weeks, months, years afterward, when both were wives with children of their own, their mother hearts beset with fears, their lives bound up in tender lives, Laura would call the little ones and tell them of her early prime, those pleasant days long gone of not returning time, would talk about the haunted glen, the wicked, quaint, fruit merchant men, their fruits like honey to the throat, but poison in the blood. Men sell not such in any town. Would tell them how her sister stood in deadly peril to do her good, and win the fiery antidote. Then, joining hands to little hands, would bid them cling together. For there is no friend like a sister in calm or stormy weather, to cheer one on the tedious way, to fetch one if one goes astray, to lift one if one totters down, to strengthen whilst one stands. We have to take our final break here, but we'll be back in just a moment with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Rescuing buried biographical truths can yield fighting words. Oh, the bitter contradictions inherent in finding oneself a poet and an educated woman in the Victorian era. I might say any era, but let's focus on the Victorians now. Christina Rossetti was a gifted child born to a gifted family, who then proceeded to lead a life of struggle, suffocating her native vitality under a smothering blanket of extreme religiosity, self-punishment, guilt, and regret. But happily, her poetry betrayed her. Her poetry leaked and trickled and finally gushed through in an avalanche, in a celebration of words and joy and sensuality. Decade on decade of ill health, her symptoms often shared with other creative women of her era who had to struggle with, quote, fainting spells and neurasthenia and so-called hysteria in order to do their work. Just that. One thinks of Elizabeth Barrett Browning herself, an invalid confined to her room until she broke through the forbidding rules of her father and the walls of that room to run away to Italy with Robert Browning. Years after the fact, Christina Rossetti counseled a niece about having been a fractious child herself and about having learned to control it. Quote, on one occasion, I seized upon a pair of scissors and ripped up my arm to vent my wrath. I have since learned to control my feelings, and no doubt you will too. Period. Close quote. Well. That's not just Gothic. Her biographer, Jan Marsh, author of the Pre-Raphaelite Sisterhood, conjectures that when Rossetti's father had his breakdown and the resultant changes in family fortunes left him a needy patriarch in the daily care of his pubescent daughter, Christina, he may well have attempted paternal incest. Certainly this chimes with some of her poetic images of a terrifying crocodile who devours his own young, with the self-cutting cited above, with her never-to-be-revealed secret, with her chronic depression, and her lifelong recurring, alternating bouts of submission and rebellion to patriarchal religion. The splendor lies in the transcending, though, as it does in the work of Barrett Browning and that of the Bronte sisters, as it later would in the work of Virginia Woolf, about whom feminist scholarship finally uncovered her childhood incesting, and about so many other women of craft and art whose sexuality had to be limited, forced, or outright sacrificed in order for them simply to be an artist and a woman. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.